Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Infinite Potential of Being Human podcast. My name is Nicky and I am your host. Welcome to all our family and our regular listeners, our dedicated, committed community that listen week after week and are sharing this podcast with everybody you know, and just being here in this inquiry, in this depth and kind of conversation that affects all of us. It affects you, it affects me, it affects our planet, it affects everyone around us, because what we are inquiring into here in this podcast and in these episodes and in these conversations is what is getting in the way of our potential as a species. And why is it that we keep finding ourselves repeating the same problems and suffering the same suffering, struggling with the same struggles, no matter what we do? And everything that is being looked at and inquired into and discussed here is from the context of body-mind maturation, from an ontological context, which is the context of the human species, as in what is it that is running our way of being as a human being. So if you are human, this relates to you, and I suspect everybody here listening right now is a human being. I don't think that we have any dogs or cats or bears that are our listeners. So we can make the assumption that everything looked at and discussed here is relatable to all of us, in relation to all of us, and relatable by and from all of us. So thank you for being here, those of you who are dedicated and committed, and welcome to everybody who are new listeners. I am so grateful to have you here, and I invite you to please take everything that I say here, no matter how deep or abstract it may come across. Please know that everything that I say here in all the episodes of this podcast are with the intention for it to be very practical, meaning if you allow this inquiry into your life, into who you've been being, into how you've been struggling, into what shows up in your 3D reality, in what shows up in your internal experience, your relationships, your relationship with money, your relationship with people, your relationships with yourself, your relationships with authority, whatever it is, however it appears and shows up for you, that's the world you live in. And so can you integrate or let in what I am saying here deep enough so that you begin to really inquire about it? Take it into your life from this episode and all the episodes, and begin to inquire into it and with it in relation to your life. Because if you start to do that, you may start to see things that you've never seen before. Things may start to land and be clearer for you that's never landed for you before. And then that allows you to have choices that you may never have had before, that you can practically integrate into who you're being and how you're living your life and how you're being a human being. And that's what I mean by I intend for it only to be practical. So welcome to everybody. Today, I'm going to be diving into an episode which may feel like I'm going back to basics, and I think it's necessary. And this is not because we're diminishing anything or we're regressing in any way, but I think that what I'm going to talk about today is such a mechanical blind spot that we miss it a million billion times a day, and yet it has such a fundamental impact to our life. So it's kind of important. So I'm going to go back to basics, and hopefully you'll hear something that you've never heard before that will help you practically start shifting your relationship with the life you currently have and the world that you currently live in. So today's topic is focused on why and how your childhood may still be running your life. And I'm diving into this topic, and it may be relatable to you if you notice that no matter what you do, no matter how much action you take, how many strategies you learn, no matter how many affirmations you take, no matter how much you try to change the external circumstances of your life, or even your own behavior, or even yourself, something still seems to be stuck, or many things seem to be stuck. And you'll be able to recognize that stuckness in ways like, I'm just not able to express myself fully in either my intimate relationships or in my creative expressions, or maybe both. You aren't able to fully express yourself in your creative expressions, meaning, are you creating anything that is in alignment and in a connection to your authentic expression? And do you feel stuck in how free you feel in expressing yourself intimately in the relationships in your life? And that maybe you don't have relationships in your life, and that's a telling sign. Or maybe you do have relationships in your life, but you consistently feel disconnected, unheard, unseen, unwanted, betrayed. That there is a level of stuckness and a lack of real fulfillment and flourishing and connection. Now, none of this is a judgment. I invite you to just see whether these pieces are showing up in your life. Other ways to be able that this may relate to you is if you notice that no matter what you do, there are patterns that keep repeating. And those patterns will be more experiential and also show up externally, meaning I always end up feeling alone, no matter how much I try to change that. Or I always end up feeling unheard, or I always end up feeling betrayed, or I always end up feeling unwanted, or there's never enough for me, or I'm unsafe, or the world doesn't get me, or people don't get me. Whatever it is, there's a repetitiveness and a familiarness to the struggle and the problem and the suffering. And that is a pattern that's repeating in your experience of your world. Now, these are all signs why this episode is important for you to hear. So, and I don't know anyone that can't hear any of those pieces show up at some point in their life. So this is a big one, and we're going to go back to basics because it really does affect everyone. So if you hear yourself in this, then I'm speaking to you, because if you can start gaining consciousness over what may be blind spots that are running your life, as long as they stay blind spots, they will have the power and they will be running your life, and you won't have power to make any changes about it. Like Carl Jung said, whatever is unconscious will appear as fate, and you will call it, what is it? Whatever is unconscious will live your life, or whatever is unconscious will live your life and you'll call it fate. Something along those lines. But that's really what I'm saying. We will mask it off as, or we'll tell ourselves that it's just the way that it is, or it's as good as it gets, or we'll make excuses about it, like, oh, this is my intuition, or this is life showing me something that is as good as it gets for me. Or we'll make excuses in our own mind rather than really wanting to let in that maybe we are connected to how our world is appearing. So the intention of this episode is to be able to, at the very least, begin to pierce some of those blind spots that are keeping you stuck from being able to have power over shifting this. The things that I'm going to cover in today's episode is, what is it that is actually stuck? Why do we as human beings keep finding ourselves in repetitive, familiar cycles and patterns, no matter how much we try to change it, no matter what we do? Why is it that action is not enough to shift the perception of our world and the way our world appears to us, the way our world literally appears to us in 3D reality? Why is it that the more actions we take and strategies we take and behaviors we change, it is not enough to shift fundamentally the unfolding of our experience of our world? That's the first thing I'm going to cover today. The second thing I'm going to cover today is what is actually happening that causes this repetitiveness. The third thing is, what is the actual ontological blind spot, meaning the human blind spot, the blind spot that is a blind spot to all human beings, the human species, not just you or some of you. If you are human, this relates to you. It's an ontological blind spot. What is the blind spot that we are stuck in? And as long as we are stuck in it, we cannot have power to shift this, not fundamentally. You could on a surface level, but then it would be temporary and then it would not fundamentally change. And then the fourth thing I want to cover is, how do we start having a new, more maturation, conscious relationship with how our childhood may be still running our life, so that we can start having more power over who we're being and how we show up and how we then get to create the unfolding of our world. We actually have that power. So let's dive in. I want to begin by telling you a story first. About a year ago, I was in a session with my teacher, and I had come out of my marriage a year before, and I had met someone else, and I was now living with that someone else, and I was half living in the US and half living in New Zealand, and my children were in New Zealand, my love and my partner and my life was in the US. And it was a difficult construct. It certainly wasn't what I had dreamed about in the fantasy of the fairy tale of the future of my life. And yet everything in it was very, very good. My relationship with my kids was really good. My relationship with my new love was really good. My work was really good. But this whole kind of structure of my reality of having my kids in one country and my love in another country was very, very painful. And I was sitting in a session with my teacher, and he said to me, I was like, why is it so hard? And it's so hard. And why is it like this? And he said to me, yes, it's really interesting that you have chosen to have the structure of your reality this way. There must be something in it that life is wanting to show you so that you can outgrow another piece of your childhood. And I thought, damn, he's really not letting me be a victim in any way. I am going to have to be 100% responsible for how my life is structured. And he was right. He said that to me, and I was like, wow, that's a really truthful and powerful way to invite me to look at it, rather than, why is my life so hard and why is it like this? He was like, why have you chosen for the structure of your reality to be this way? And what is life trying to reveal to you? Now, when I say life, that could mean the universe, that could mean the intelligence of the universe, that could mean a higher intelligence. So I mean a higher intelligence. What is life trying to reveal to you in how your reality is structured so that you can outgrow another piece of your childhood, which would be in the service of our maturation, our evolution as human beings. I thought, wow. Firstly, that completely eradicated any victim energy whatsoever. As much of a kick in the gut it was when he said that to me, I simultaneously felt empowered. I had about a millisecond before I had to decide, am I going to continue complaining and being a victim to the structure of my reality? Or am I going to take full responsibility for how it's structured and then use it to try to learn what it is that it is here to teach me, to allow me to outgrow? Can you hear how one has very little power? Being a victim to our reality is not, it doesn't give us an awful lot of power, does it? It certainly doesn't feel empowering as much as we may pretend to ourselves that it does. It really isn't. The other one is annoying because we can't blame or complain or moan and blaming is so much more, it's easier than taking full responsibility for our reality. But that one gives us power. It may be uncomfortable power, but it does give us power because we're no longer victims to anything that's happening to us. We have created it, or we've co-created it with life, and there's something in it that for us to learn from so that we can outgrow it and mature and use it to shift something, another layer of our childhood. And of course, he was absolutely right. I had to sit with it for quite a few months. Every time I left my children, I would feel this extraordinary pain in my heart, and longing in my heart, but knowing that staying where they lived would only allow me to be there as their mother, but completely abandon my purpose in the world and my calling in the world, and being with my soulmate. But then when I was with my partner and when I was with my children and away from my partner and in their world, I could see that it required me to abandon some part of myself. So I could see that even though it was extremely painful, having these two different realities, at the moment, there was no solution without betraying or abandoning myself in some way. And so neither of those felt authentic. Betraying and abandoning myself does not allow me to be the model to my children that I want to be and that I need to be for them. And so I had to sit with it. I had to feel the longing and the pain every time I was away from my partner and every time I was away from my children. After about 3 to 4 months, something profound started to show itself to me. As I left my children again and I was going back to the States, I felt this deep, deep pain in my heart. And I really didn't resist it. I let myself feel it very deeply. And very quickly, I started to see something that I'd never seen before. I started to recognize that this was exactly how I felt when I was a teenager and my mother would send me to boarding school in England, but she lived in Hong Kong and my father lived somewhere else because they were divorced. And the longing that I would have for what felt like home was painful in there. But when I was at home, it didn't feel safe or nourishing. So the longing that I would have would be to get away and go back to boarding school. And I realized how familiar or even identical the experience was to how I felt as a child. And so I started to see very clearly, there are pieces in this that sit in my body-mind system where my history, my childhood is still frozen, that I have yet to have faced and experienced, that is still coloring and shaping my reality. and the structure of my reality. And so there was gold in this. There was such a gift. And it allowed me to start to experience and face pieces that had been frozen in time in my body mind system, that had been buried and dormant. And another piece of my childhood was allowed to be experienced and felt, and alchemized. Now, that's just a little example of how deep this goes. So the first thing I want to show you is what's actually stuck when we find ourselves in these challenges in our life that seem to be stuck, seem to be representing something that's stuck, when the money doesn't flow, or the relationships that we have are so unfulfilling, or we just can't seem to express ourselves, and it keeps repeating over and over and over again. Well, the first thing I want to say is that one of the biggest illusions, ontological illusions, is our relationship with time. You see, we get conditioned that time is linear, that time is back there, the past is back there, and the future is over there. And we do mechanically relate to time in this way. Look at yourself right now. Whatever age you are, when you think of your childhood, you mechanically and automatically think that it is, 20 years ago or 30 years ago. And it's no longer here now, meaning it's in the past. And the more that you move forwards into your future, the further away you get from your past. And so most human beings live in that blind spot. And it is an illusion. In fact, it's inaccurate. It's highly inaccurate. It's a construct. In fact, there is no past, and there is no present. There is no future. There is only now. And our entire history is right here, right now. Now, what do I mean by that? Well, we can only experience any experience in the present moment. Let me say that again. We can only experience any experience in the present moment. The moment we experience that experience, it gets lodged in our memory bank in the mind as memory. We then have the memory about that experience stored in our nervous system and in the hard drive of space-time continuum. And our brain is like an antenna to the space-time continuum, meaning everything that is stored as memory is stored in the hard drive of the space-time continuum, and our brain is the antenna for it. And all the experiences of terror and anxiety and overwhelm and panic, they're all stored in the nervous system. In fact, everything we're experienced is stored in the nervous system. Now, because the mind is only designed for our survival, the particular experiences that get frozen in time and stuck are usually the ones that were the most difficult and challenging and a perceived threat to our survival. For example, you're a child standing in the doorway, watching your father stand at the front door with his suitcase and he's ready to leave. And you're 4 years old. In that moment, in that present moment, you're flooded with panic and anxiety and longing and fear and sadness. And as he looks at you and he maybe says goodbye, he walks out the door and he leaves. I'm saying that he's leaving for good. And as the door shuts, your whole system is flooded with a whole set of emotions, painful ones. And those emotions will communicate to the mind, which is designed to help you survive, that is a perceived moment of threat to your survival. Meaning a child that is 4 cannot survive without their father or mother. It's not logical or rational. I mean, literally, they can't. Their mom and dad are their whole world. So the moment that it is recognized as a perceived point of threat, that is frozen and lodged into the body-mind system as an unsurvivable moment that you survived, a perceived unsurvivable moment that you survived, meaning your nervous system and body is flooded with pain and sadness and longing and anxiety and fear and whatever else would be appropriate to a moment like that. And it will be wired in the neural pathways with some conceptual meaning or story that the mind makes it mean. Meaning, I must not be lovable, or it's because I'm not lovable. The mind will always make meaning of whatever experience, challenging experience it is that we're having. And it's mechanical. So in that moment, as 4, the only time that we experience that experience is in the present. And then immediately it becomes lodged memory. And because it seems like a perceived point of threat, it will be a particular frozen memory that the mind will keep looping back to. Because it needs to, if its function is to help you survive. From that moment onwards, all that panic, anxiety, pain, sadness, longing will be stored as frozen memory in the nervous system. And the mind will recognize it as a point of threat to your survival that it needs to make sure you never have to go through again. And whatever conceptual meaning your mind made or you made it mean about yourself, I'm not lovable, will be wired as a representation of what is true for you. Now, try to bear with me on this so we don't get too complex, but try to get this. That is now frozen in time as a representation of who you think you are. Your frozen moment in time. I'm not lovable, wired and entangled with the experience of panic and sadness and longing and unworthiness. And from that moment onwards, literally from that moment onwards, every step that 4-year-old takes into her future, she is bringing that filter, that representation of who she is, everywhere she goes. She's bringing the past with her every step she takes. And the mind is a pattern recognition device, meaning it will recognize anything. It will be tracking and scanning everything anything and everything that looks remotely or appears remotely similar to that perceived point of threat. And the moment it tracks it, it will send communication to your entire body-mind system, and the past will be flooding you right there in the present, and you'll be reliving the past over again. For example, that 4-year-old becomes a 7-year-old. And She is now in the classroom, and she's built a relationship with her teacher, and her teacher is standing at the front of the room, and she puts her hand up to speak, and the teacher tells her that she's too busy right now and that she should focus on her work. Anything to do with intimacy and connection and need, just that millisecond, the mind will experience, will recognize something remotely similar, and send the communication to reactivate that survival mechanism. And within milliseconds, as a 7-year-old, she will be flooded again with the same anxiety, panic, fear, sadness, longing, and the story and the representation of who she thinks she is as, I'm not lovable. And how does somebody behave as a reaction to that taking place? That will then drive her behavior. It may cause her to hold her breath and bury her shoulders, and to keep her mouth shut and to not say anything. In fact, maybe from then on, she stops putting her hand up. Maybe from then on, she becomes very, very withdrawn. Or the opposite. Maybe she becomes like she has to get needy and she has to try even harder and she's constantly putting her hand up. The point is that whatever is the way the world appears to her, which is the representation of her father walking out the door when she was 4, will drive how she behaves. And then she grows into a 12-year-old and she has her first crush, and the mind recognizes it again, and boof, she's flooded again. And the same experience takes place, and that drives her behavior even more. And then it just keeps happening over and over and over and over again until that whole identity, it's wired in your system as so normalized to you that it happens just every time you go for a job, or every time the bus driver doesn't stop and wait for you, or every time your partner rolls his eyes. I'm telling you, it's any moment that is remotely familiar. And every step we take into the future, we are bringing our past. And it is unconscious and it is mechanical. And then we confuse the past with the present. And then we deal with it as if it is happening now. And that's why we find ourselves repeating the same stuff over and over and over again. Why our jobs always feel like the evidence that we really aren't worthy, or every relationship we have really is evidence that we are abandoned and unwanted, because we are bringing the context of our past every step we take into the present. And that colors and shapes how our present appears to us. So, human behavior is a result and a reaction to the way that the world appears to you. And the way that the world appears to you is shaped by the context or the filter from which you are looking. So if where you are looking is your past childhood, which is ontological, that's every human being, because that's the way that the mind works, until you've outgrown those pieces of the past and until you start maturing your relationship with how the body-mind works. Your past is the context from which your world is appearing, which is why your world appears in very familiar, repetitive ways. And then you react and behave based on how that world appears. So if the way that the world appears is that you're being dismissed and unloved and unwanted, that is going to drive your behavior. How does somebody behave in a world that feels like they're unwanted and unloved and dismissed and not chosen? They certainly won't be taking risks in their business, and they certainly will be stifling their expression, and they certainly will be not sharing their heart, and maybe they'll be very defensive, and maybe they'll be very reactive. The way you react and respond to reality is based on how your reality appears. And your reality appears given by where you're looking from. You see, that itself is also a blind spot. Most people think that reality is already out there and happening separate and independent from you. But that is not the nature of reality. That is inaccurate. The nature of reality is that the only reality that appears is shaped and given by the context from where you're looking, meaning your internal world is shaping and giving you the experience of your external world. And then how your external world appears shapes and gives you how you behave. And how you behave is what gives you the repetitive results that you have in your life. Meaning, if somebody who is continually stifling their voice because the world appears like they're not wanted, given by their past, they will continue to stifle their voice and not take actions, and therefore hold themselves back. And it's very unlikely that they will have very successful results in what they do. So can you see how massive this is? And this is not just some of you. This is running the human race. This is a blind spot of the human species. Let me take this a little bit deeper, and in a confronting, maybe a provocative way. I don't mean it provocative, but it may be triggering. I don't mean it that way, but I just want to use it as teaching. Let's use Hitler as an example, just because he's also a human being, and he did probably some of the most horrific things on the planet. But let's use him as an example just to show how that applied to him as much as it applies to us, because he's also a human being. Hitler, his mother was a very strict Catholic, but he was very close to her. They were very, very close. His father was dominating, controlling, very, very controlling and dominating and strict and cold and hard. So he had a real resistance to his father, but he was very close to his mama. And then his mother died. I think it was in his late teens, but somewhere around his late teens, his mother died, and he was left alone with his father. Now, as he was growing up as a child, because it's survival, children need their parents to survive. They literally cannot survive in the world without mom and dad. Mom and dad are the world. The only choices he had were this scary, dominating, controlling father, or mother who was loving but very, very strictly religious. So, of course, he chose mama, and he rejected his father. In fact, it's very mechanical to think, oh, I'm never going to be anything like him, and I want to be close to her. But of course, when she died, he was left alone with him, the father. And all of this is already shaping so much of how he sees the world and what his mind is shaping in order for him to survive. He was resisting being anything like his father, but of course, how could he not be like his father when he's growing up in the environment with his father that's shaping his identity? So as he grows up, he is now, in order to try to stay close to his mother who's passed, taking on all the values and connections that she had, which was this very, very strict, religious, Aryan way of being. This is the clean, pure way. And that's the good way. That's the right way, with a lot of guilt and shame. while simultaneously he's resisting being anything like his father. And what we resist persists. In fact, what we resist will run our life. So, surprise, surprise, behavioral wise, he becomes just like his father, very controlling, dominating, hard, cold. And of course, then that drives behavior. And you look at how he dealt with the world and what he did. The same with Vladimir Putin. He was a little boy born to two parents that were extremely traumatized by the war and very, very poor. They were so traumatized they were unable to really take care of him. And he was often in the streets and left hungry, like there wasn't enough food in the house. And he was a young, short boy. He was small. So he used to get beaten up by the bigger boys at school on a regular basis. But then his mother would not do anything about it. She was so consumed by her own pain and struggle and trauma. So all that history is frozen in his system. He is alone. No one's going to take care of him. And there's something wrong with him. And he keeps getting in danger because there's something wrong with him. That becomes the representation of how his world appears. And the way the world appears gives you the way you behave, meaning you react and behave in reaction to the way the world appears. And the way the world appears is given by where you're looking from. Is it a real surprise that Vladimir Putin has made sure that nobody will ever bully him again? He literally has become the one that will make sure that nobody bullies him again. Who is looking through his eyes as a little boy is his past, shaping and giving him a repeating, familiar appearing of his past, but confusing it with the present, that then shapes and drives his behavior, that then gives him the results of his world and the world that he's creating. Now, this is applicable to you in your individual life, but if you also look at the impact that it's having on the species on the planet, as long as this is a blind spot, we have no power over it. So that comes to the point 4. What do we do about it? How can we shift this? Well, step number 1, just knowing this blind spot is a human blind spot, meaning if you are human, this relates to you, inevitably. It is a human ontological blind spot. So it's not some of you, it's all of us. And if we're ready to be responsible for that and to really let that in, well, that is the first step to having some power. Second, look at where your life is stuck and where your life is repeating. In fact, go deeper. How is the world appearing to you? Now, that already is a huge invitation of self-responsibility. That shifts us from, that's just the way the world is, rather than, oh, the way my world is has something to do with me. That's another really big invitation for self-responsibility. The way my world appears has something to do with me. So how does my world appear? Am I ready to stop blaming everyone else, including myself, and start really inquiring, how does my world appear? Because the way it appears is giving me invaluable information of where I may be looking from. What is the context from where I'm looking that is shaping the way the world appears? So get your journals out, start writing this down. How does my world appear? You'll know this based on the repetitive complaints and suffering that you experience internally and externally. I never have enough. Nobody ever sees me. I'm never wanted. I'm always betrayed. I'm alone. I'm unloved. I'm unchosen. The way that your world appears will be consistent to the context of your past. That is quite literally looking through your eyes, giving you the world. That's why it's called maturation. We literally need to mature our past so that the way the world appears starts maturing beyond our past. When we shift where we're looking from, when we outgrow the child, the way that reality appears starts shifting too. So that's the first step. How does my world appear? And what does that tell me about where I'm looking from? And then the next inquiry, where in my childhood did I constantly experience not being wanted, not being loved? If the past is not back there, but here now, how is that shaping the way my world is? And the way my world is shapes how I behave. And then that leaves the final inquiry. Am I ready to be fully responsible for how the world appears as the past that is here right now? Meaning, when I realized that the longing and the pain that I was experiencing in the structure of my split world, I was actually experiencing the past here in the present. But I've never really ever been able to fully be with that. I just kept brushing over it and constructing my present. But it was my past. I had to feel the pain of being split as a child, always being split, not being with mama, not being with father, in another country, far away, longing, always longing. That is my past right here, right now. Nothing outside of me is putting that inside of me. In fact, I am bringing the past with me everywhere I go. And until we are able to experience those frozen moments in time, they will continue to stay frozen and loop and repeat and construct our reality now. These 4 steps are steps that every single one of us can take to have far more power over the unfolding of our world, over our behavior. You see, when you're able, if you're in a fight with your partner and it continues to appear to you like you're being betrayed and there's a repetitiveness to it, just in that one struggle in your relationship, you can shift it and alchemize it so profoundly. Wow, how is this appearing to me? I am always unwanted in the way it appears to me. If that's what's repetitive and I'm the only one who's consistently there every time it is, then now can I look at, where must I be looking from? What in my past is giving me that repetitive experience and appearing? Oh, wow. It has nothing to do with my partner. That is the pain of not being loved and wanted. And that is for me to feel. How much can I be with that right here, right now, knowing it is the past, but it is my responsibility. And when we can be with the frozen moments of past, they unfreeze and they move. And we start to have choices we've never been able to choose before. Maybe it'll give you the power to choose to behave slightly differently in the usual triggered dynamic that you have with your partner. Maybe it'll allow you to behave differently with yourself. And that begins to change your behavior. That begins to change your way of being. And that is what gives you different results. So I hope that you have found this useful. It was a deep one, an important one, and it affects everyone. If you have loved these episodes and have found them useful, please stick around and subscribe to our YouTube channel with the button below. And please stick around to listen to the next episode, where I'm going to be speaking about how do we see all this? How do we see ourselves? How do we see anything in life from a place of deep compassion, which allows us to stop blaming ourselves and everyone else, which is the pathway to enormous amounts of power. So stick around and listen to that episode. I love you all. Thank you so much.